was it like growing up as Idris Jala's son?
Terrible. Most of my teenage years, I distanced myself from my father. So anything that he did, I would make sure that I did the complete opposite. When I spoke to the therapist, she said what you basically have is something called automatic negative thoughts. Whenever my dad and I do any sort of speaking engagement, and then when they start to put out their marketing materials or communications materials, they would title the talk by Idris Jala. Leon Jala is nowhere in the picture, nowhere in the materials.
So Leon, what was it like growing up as Idris Jala's son?
Terrible. No, I mean, for the most part, it's obviously it's an amazing thing. If I were to say that it was amazing all the way around, I'd be lying, because I think for the longest time, I actually had a real complex around being the son of someone who was prominent, someone successful, because I think naturally expectations that I sometimes put on myself, but also sometimes expectations that maybe other people might have on me to maybe walk a certain path. And so what that meant for me is that for most of my teenage years, I distanced myself from my father. So anything that he did, I would make sure that I did the complete opposite. Because for me, I didn't want to, I figured it'd be easier to do something completely different than to kind of walk in his footsteps, not do as well, and then to be judged for my lack of effort or lack of success in the same space. And so for a long time, I would always make sure that I took a divergent path in everything that I did. And it was only, I think, in the last sort of maybe 10 years where I figured out, you know what, actually, I'm the one losing out. If I continue to distance myself, I'm not actually making use of all the learning and different things that I can glean from him.
Can we start with this part? As you're growing up, being a son of Idris Jala, a very famous man, someone who's very powerful, and most will say sometimes he's even more powerful than the normal CEO. Do you have people expecting you to be like the mini Idris? And they go, hey, Leon, why are you not like your dad? Your dad is like that, but you are like that.
Oh, totally. I mean, look at me. That's why I'm tattooed up. Because I also wanted to make sure that besides my vocation, that there would be also a very obvious visual distinction between Idris Jala and the son of Idris Jala, who is this tattooed fella. And so for me, there was definitely some sort of expectation. But I would say actually, if I were to look back in retrospect, most of the expectation actually came from myself. Of course, there were people who would say things like, oh, don't you want to go into, public policy? Don't you want to go into consulting like your father? But for the most part, those were, I realized, innocent comments. There wasn't much of an expectation. It's just sometimes people don't have, maybe they're trying to fill up conversation. And so they say stuff like that. But it was on me, actually, where I put the weight on myself. And that was why I started to see, what can I do to distance as much as possible for the most part of my life. But I suppose what helped for me in terms of dealing with this is that wasn't always the story with my family. So, growing up, my dad wasn't always a somebody. He was always someone who did well in his work, but he only really started to get recognized. I would say his first sort of more public position was when we moved to Sri Lanka. Where he was the MD of Shell there. That was his first very public role. By that time, I was probably around 10 already. So for most of those early parts of my childhood, it was quite normal. And so being the son of Idris Jala was just like any other person. But it was from sort of 10, 11 onwards where I started to become a bit more cognizant. And then maybe some of those complexes started to come about.
So a lot of people would have this perception when your dad is someone who is famous, rich, and in authority, their children tend to be quite an right? Yeah. So did that kind of hit you at one phase of a life where you felt that, I'm a dad of somebody?
Yeah.
Right. Was that ever something for you?
Yeah. So I mentioned how my dad wasn't really a somebody at the start. And to be honest, I was a bit of an as a kid, but that was just me, just as a general personality, nothing to do with my dad being a somebody. I was just quite a difficult, very vocal child.
Really?
And so the joke is that when I tell people this, they say, "Oh, but like, how is that possible? I can't imagine that." And so I tell people the joke is that, I think I got it out of my system early. And I'd like to think that I got it out of my system early enough so that by the time my dad was somebody, I was already in my sort of nice guy Leon phase lah.
So these two are independent things. It didn't.
Correct.
It did not encourage you to be worse, lah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although some people might suddenly write in the comments, actually, that's not true. Leon is a complete,
Okay.
whatever.
Now, having said that, what do you think is the most unfair assumption that people have about you simply because of who your dad is?
Well, I think that would be one of them, maybe that because of who my dad is, that maybe I'm someone who likes to throw his weight around. That would be one assumption. Sometimes the other assumption is that because obviously my father is successful, has done well in business, natural virtue of that his children will probably be not necessarily the most hardworking people, not people who would be willing to roll up their sleeves and to sort of build their own and chart their own path. So I think those would be two misconceptions.
Right. Now, you yourself as well, because growing up in that environment in the later days as a teenager, I believe many of your friends are of a certain status as well, right? What do you think they will say if I were to ask them, like, what's the most unfair statement people make about them, like whenever it comes to their success or
Right.
what they're working on or stuff like that? Because for most people, they will just go, because your dad is who, ma?
Right. Yeah.
So what do you think they will say?
Yeah, I think the common thing is that they will say, well, whatever success that I'm able to achieve on my own will never be fully credited to me. But that the conception will be, well, of course they could do that because their father is so and so. So they would have obviously opened up the door for that to happen. So
Right.
I think that's probably the sort of misconception that is shared across the board. We had Tan Sri Nazir on our podcast a couple of months ago, and he shared a similar thing. And in fact, he wrote a whole book about this. His book's titled "What's in a Name," and it talks about that whole dynamic as well of, as much as you sort of work hard to chart your own path because of the name you carry, while obviously that comes with privileges as well, and we can't deny that it comes with privileges, but there is also a certain challenge and maybe sometimes undue pressure, sometimes unwarranted judgment as well, and diminishing of one's achievements because of maybe a certain name that they carry.
So at what point did you came to realize that there has to be some sort of a incident that kind of made you feel like, because my dad is, so it kind of takes away or questions my achievement, right?
Not until much later, because I think I did such a good job at distancing myself from him. I never gave anyone a chance to compare me with my dad because I was always doing something so different. So if my dad was, prior to going into government, then he was obviously just known as the turnaround, the business guy. If he was in business, then everything I did from as early as even in my studies, I did all of the arts subjects. So I studied fine arts. Even in uni, I ended up doing film studies so that there would be no chance of comparison. When I went into the workplace, I went into advertising. So I was in the agency life. Also, no way that people can compare. And also people in agency don't even know who my dad is anyway. So that was very helpful for me. At what point did I maybe realize that there was a bit of this dynamic? I think for me, it would have been when I finally decided to step into the consulting world with my dad. One of the conditions that we had, maybe I'll backtrack a little bit. So all this while, obviously my dad, my mom, even my wife have been saying, actually, why wouldn't you consider joining Pemandu? And all of this while, I never wanted to do it for those reasons that I already explained earlier. But one day when I was talking to my wife, I said, well, the only one way I would probably consider it is if we could maybe start something of our own within the fold, but doing something completely different. Because again, I don't want to be compared, and also I don't want to directly report to my dad. And so I said, well, if there was a chance to maybe start some sort of, like a marketing arm or communications arm, then maybe that would be something I would consider. But I said, but that will never happen. And so we left that conversation. 2 days later, I get a text from my dad saying, hey, I've just had a really interesting conversation with our director of comms, and we've had this idea to spin that off into its own entity, its own revenue generating entity. And he said, what's Leon doing? I'd like to have a chat with him. And this conversation was completely independent of the conversation that I had with my wife. And so I kind of took that as, maybe God is doing something here. Maybe this is a bit of divine intervention. But nonetheless, I wanted to test that because, I'm a Christian and I have a strong Christian faith. But that also doesn't mean that I just assume everything is from God and you kind of go into things blindly. And so I said, well, okay, I'll have a conversation with that director of comms. His name is Alex, and discern from there. And as I was praying, I gave a few conditions to the big guy, to God. And so I went into this conversation, and all those things that I had in my mind to say, God, if this is you, make this and that happen. All of those things were aligned, and we felt super aligned with Alex on what he wanted to do. It's all in line with the things that we thought could probably shape and change a bit of the industry. And so we decided to go ahead and do this. But in the process, even though that was not me directly being part of the consulting business, I still felt the kind of the eyes around me lah.
Yeah.
It was a separate thing, but because we were still in the same space, I think that was when I came to realize, I think maybe there's this idea that whatever I am able to achieve, and we did very well in that arm, that would usually just be because of certain connections I had, thanks to my father. And I'm not going to deny that there were certain things during that time where, of course, it helped to have my dad involved as well. I think it's disingenuous to assume that I do everything on my own and don't give credit to the people who have helped to pave the way for you. I think there were some things which obviously were helpful to have him around in the early stages, but for the most part, a lot of what we did was really steered by Alex, who was the MD of that outfit, and then my wife and I, Andrea, who were his founding partners in that venture.
Now, talking about that period of time, right? A lot of us will assume that it's such a privilege to grow up in a family where your dad is famous and successful, or even a boss of a company in this case. But how does it feel like when it comes to a point that whatever effort you put, people just discount it, or even sometimes don't even talk about discount, people just deny that your effort plays a role at all. It is like as if everything you do doesn't matter. All that matter is your name and who you are as a son of someone. How does that actually really feel like?
I mean, to be honest, the raw feeling is obviously it doesn't feel good. It can be quite frustrating. And when I decided to step into the fold and accept that I'm now going to take the comparison, then obviously I know I made the decision to do that, but it still sucked whenever you felt those vibes. To answer your question, I think what has helped me was some really life-changing words that my wife spoke to me, which was, Leon, not everything is about you. And I thought that was so freeing. When she first said that, I was a bit offended by what she said. But then I realized, yeah, actually, if I start to realize that life and things are not so much about me, by taking myself out of the equation, I can focus on actually what is the end outcome that I want to achieve, whether it's through this venture, whether it's through the work that I do in the church. What's the true north, if you like? This is what my dad talks a lot about. What are we trying to effect here? If you're more focused on the thing that you're trying to effect and less focused about the role that you have to play in it, then I found that for me, that has helped me to think, of course, people are still going to have certain opinions and thoughts about me, but that helps me to be able to acknowledge the fact that, okay, call it out. So maybe there might be certain opinions on me, but that will help me to be able to move forward a little bit quicker and maybe not be so upset about it.
Right.
When we start to become very insular and we think that things are about us, then obviously if someone thinks something about us or says something ill about us, then we're obviously going to be more willing to take that to heart. And then the problem with that is that becomes a hindrance to whatever it is that you want to do. And you take your focus away from the thing you're trying to achieve, and you now bring the focus into you. And I think when that happens, that is what births insecurity, that is what births unnecessary anxiety as well in the work that you do.
I think to apply that and to ask you this is there are certain people that I know who basically feel hopeless about their situation because there's no way that you're going to change your name. Right?
Yeah, right.
And it's attached with you.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not like I work harder.
Yeah.
That's not the answer. So it can feel rather hopeless. Like everything is just totally out of control, right? And sometimes I think the same hopelessness may not be for someone who is born in a privileged family or facing the exact same thing, but they may just generally feel like whatever they do, there's nothing that can be changed because perception of people cannot be changed, things cannot be changed. How will you give an advice to these people today if you see anyone facing that situation?
So there's this framework that I like to follow. It's very simple. It spells the word PASS, PASS. Before you approach anything, the first thing you try to ask yourself is P, what is the greater purpose? Is there a greater purpose that I feel passionate about? And there's a reason why we say purpose and not passion, because you can be passionate about something, but that might not necessarily be your kind of area of purpose or value that you add to society. Those can be hobbies. Like, I'm passionate about guitar. Would I say that is my calling to be the best guitarist? I don't think so. I think there are a lot of other people who'll be able to do that better. So find out, what is the purpose? What's a problem that you see in the world that you think, based on your natural abilities, you would be able to add value to? So purpose is one. A stands for audience. So this is a bit of an extension of the first one, which is, if you've got a sense of purpose, then the next thing is, do you think that there's an inherent audience for that thing that you want to do? Are people going to care? And is that thing going to serve other people ultimately? If the answer is yes to that, then you move on to the next thing, which is this thing going to be of service? Is it going to help to put you in a position of service rather than consolidating power and influence? If there is an element of service to it, where you're benefiting, a wider community other than yourself, maybe even other than the team that you're working with, then that is probably something good. Which then brings you to the fourth letter, which is another S, which is scale. Now, some people, when you think about scale, you might think, scale means, is this like a venture or something? That doesn't mean you grow a company. Well, in some cases, if that's what you want to do, then yeah, scale looks like that. But actually, scale is more of a posture of, is what I'm doing, am I able to bring someone else on this journey as well, to invest in someone? So it doesn't necessarily need to mean that you hire people to scale a team as you would for a business, but it could also mean, is there a way that whatever I'm doing now can be used to invest in, even if it's just one person? Is there a chance for me to mentor someone else in the process of pursuing this? And I think if you're able to do that, that gives you quite a solid thing to grasp at, that takes you beyond yourself. And I think when you have that sense of past, that sense of purpose, you're less likely to spend time in the doldrums of self-doubt.
Yeah, that's very good. I think that's a really practical way of that statement. It's not about you.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Now, let's switch things up a little bit. I thought of playing this very simple game called Deeper Talk, right?
Okay.
So on the table here, there's 3 sets of cards. Each represent a different category. Feel free to just pull out any random card and answer those questions.
Okay. Any card,
Any
any
one of
color,
them.
yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the only condition is this. You cannot switch cards.
Okay.
No backing out.
Okay. I like green, so I will go green. Okay, can I take a look at it now?
Yep.
And I read out the question?
Yes.
When did a guardian angel show up in your life? Well, the first answer I'd give to this is my wife. I think my wife, in a way, is in many ways a guardian angel to me. She's the one person who I say is the warrior in my life. I said earlier how she told me that not everything is about you. Do you know what? I think in my entire circle, she's probably the only person who would ever tell me things as directly as that.
Wow.
And so I found that to be hugely life-giving, because I think in most cases I have a lot of people who are great encouragers, which is great as well. But actually having someone like a guardian angel who also just sort of tells you exactly as it is has been very helpful for me to be able to become aware of where my own limits are, maybe some of my own blind spots, and then to be able to develop from there.
I think if we were to explore that topic just very, very quickly on people who will give you honest advice and honest opinions, perhaps, I think that is something that is not easy, because sometimes, especially when you are becoming more and more successful in life, or you are someone of someone, number one, there's a certain sense of pride to, hey, who are you to tell me that, right? And number two also is that people also dare not offend you. And that's something that I learned along the way as I read books and I looked at people. Most of them, their downfall happens when they reach a top, and when people start changing facts just to bring them the good news rather than the bad, right? And that's when the beginning where everything starts going down. So I think that the point I want to make to people out there is this. If you have people around you who are willing to give you full, honest opinion to the point that it actually offend you, see it as a privilege. And the higher up you go, the more you need to keep those friends who don't give a damn about who you are.
Yeah.
But here's the irony, right? We want people to see us as who we are, not how rich we are, who we are associated with. And that's generally the basic human desire. And we have heard classic stories like people who are very rich who want to meet someone and they try to hide their identity because they don't want people to know that they're millionaire or multimillionaire or billionaire. I just want you to know me as I am. But when someone knows you as you are, it comes together with the criticism as you are. And then we gotta be able to work on that humility and just accept, right?
Yeah.
Now, next one.
Okay, take another. Huh? Let's go yellow this time. If you could only leave your children one life lesson, wow, what would it be?
Ooh,
Wow, that's a deep one.
that carries a lot of Jala legacy.
I gotta think hard about this one. I'll take a stab at this, and this is maybe me speaking a little bit more with my pastor's hat on. I think it would be for them to acknowledge and to know the fact that they are capable of a lot more that they can imagine. But the caveat is that that vision for that massive thing that they'd be able to achieve might not necessarily be in the way that they want it to happen. And obviously for us as Christians, we can do this because we believe that ultimately our role on earth is to be able to serve God and to be able to glorify Him. And we believe that we worship the God who is capable of the impossible, a God who spoke the universe into being. And so by simple virtue of that, if we have that same power living within us, then obviously that means that we are capable of doing incredible things as well, not by our own strength, but through Him. But I think where the shortfall is sometimes people think, well, that means that I need to become maybe a billionaire. I want to do these incredible things. Sometimes the way that outworks itself might be through financial gain like that. But sometimes you can make a massive impact, but not necessarily in that way. You know, maybe for some of them, the impact that you make might look a little bit more like a Mother Teresa, you know, a life of service, still huge global impact, but not necessarily by means of success in the worldly way. So I think that would be my encouragement to my children. If there was one thing, it's just to know that you are capable of a lot more than you think, but to also handle your own agenda lightly, because you might find that your purpose might actually look a little bit different to what you think. And maybe in the start of it, you might wonder, why am I down this path? But I think if we know that we are called to great things, then we can also be assured that as we continue to pursue that, one day we'll be able to look back and say, you know, I'm glad that things worked out the way they did, because that was far more than what I was ever able to conjure up for myself and to dream for myself even.
That's a good one.
We went deep real fast, man.
Yeah, I picked that card the last round as well.
Did you?
Yes, I picked that card the last round. So I have to give acknowledgement to Cultivating the Masses podcast. It's a podcast by Kelvin, a good friend of mine. Yeah, and he let me play this game during the podcast. And I think I picked out the exact same card.
Oh, nice. What did you say?
For me, it's not too different. But basically, mine would be, I want them to know, actually it's exactly the same, that they can accomplish anything that they set their mind into, right? But a big part of it, you need to remember to be resilient. Yeah. That it's okay to fall. It's okay that things don't go your way, because ultimately it will happen. I think a big part of what we're talking about, whether Christians or not, especially those who are non-Christian out there watching, or even if you're atheists, right? I think there's this thing that everyone have to understand is, ultimately, for most people, when we talk about purpose in life, it shouldn't be inward directing. I think the idea of purpose is always very outward directing.
Yeah.
It shines a light on the outside, not on the inside.
Correct.
Right? And sometimes that's where people get it wrong, when we start thinking about the world revolves around us. Who am I in this whole thing? I've met people who their whole life purpose is just to prove other people wrong because they want to be right. And that life is just miserable. It is when you start letting go of the self and say, hey, is there anything else that I can do? Kind of like pass, right? There's a similar framework to that. And that's when you live a very fulfilling life. And the part about the word calling that I love, and I think people should study that more, is that idea that a big part of our life is vocation, and vocation equals to calling, right?
Right.
In I think Greek translation, if I'm not wrong, right? And it basically means that you're being called to do something greater than yourself, and because you're being called to, it's not yourself. Therefore, you should be able to acknowledge the fact that things don't go your way as well.
Exactly.
Right? And there comes this very weird, I'm striving for my best, yet I am contented at where I am kind of idea, right?
Yeah.
Which I think whether or not are you a religious person, to study that part of understanding will be greatly helpful. And I think it solves a lot of problem. And once you get that right, and why I wish that for my children also is because I truly acknowledge that maybe my children will not have big impactful dreams. Maybe for them, a dream big is, I just want to have a little orphanage, or I just want to open a little business, right? It doesn't matter, right? Because we have heard so many stories where one little act of kindness that transformed one person's life, which end up transforming many other people's life. And that's how I see, how I wish my children will see their lives to be.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's about impact.
That's right.
Impact. You can make a big impact running a small orphanage, because ultimately, what is the metric there? The metric there is lives changed, right? It's not financial gain, it's not team growth, but by doing that, it's small in terms of looking at it as a business, but you're directly making an impact in people's lives. And so I think that is the other thing. Make sure that whatever you do, your metric is like ultimately impact and not necessarily money. Money is secondary. Obviously as a natural byproduct, you might make some, you might have some financial gain from there. But even then, once you do that, how do you then make sure that pours back into furthering the impact that you want to make?
That's right. Yeah. In fact, I think having financial gain is quite important, because I always don't believe in 100% charity.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's sustainable. I've seen so many people running around raising for money and gets tired.
Yeah.
Right. Even donors get tired. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
And very often, because of that tiredness, donors get to determine the agenda of the impact that you're bringing as well. So I always think that it's very important to have a for-profit social organization, which actually that's how I see my organization as. Yeah. I think, perhaps maybe under Game of Impossible with your kids, you should set up a dashboard. Weekly impact dashboard. When they're old enough. No, let's move on to the next one.
Okay.
Yeah, just one more.
Okay, another one. Let's pick a different color this time. Let's go blue. Oh, wow. Okay, this is a good question. What seemingly insignificant thing contributes greatly to your happiness? I think it's just simple moments of connection and calm with my family. And I want to give a caveat here, because I think there's a difference between happiness and joy. So obviously, joy is like an underlying thing that you can always have, even in the midst of adversity. And for me, as a Christian, then obviously that source of joy comes from my faith in God. But then if you talk about then things that are maybe external, obviously my family gives me great joy as well. But just specific moments would be just those simple moments of connection, whether it's reading a bedtime story to my kids before they go to bed, when the rest of the day has kind of settled and you've got that time of connection with them, or whether, for my wife and I, sometimes it's just the simple things of having, after put our kids to bed, having a little moment of respite to ourselves, just sitting in front of the TV. Sometimes we don't even have to say anything to one another, but that gives me great happiness, just being in their presence.
Yeah.
These are like deep questions, man.
I mean, the whole deck's a deeper talk. No, moving on to the next part of it, now that we have come to the end of the game, let's go back into the question about being the son of Idris Jala, right? When is the first time that you come to a point that you say, I'm not going to be just Idris Jala's son?
I think when I made a decision to go into advertising, there are a few moments. So I would say that was probably the one defining moment where I took a hard stance, because coming out of uni, it's still a level playing field. Obviously my degree that I studied was priming me a little bit more for that industry, but I could have also arguably tried to get an internship with Mandu and go down that path. So that was one moment where I said, you know what, I'm going to commit to going down a very different path. I'm going to go work for an advertising firm. And so I worked for Leo Burnett for many years. That was one, because that gave me a chance to be able to do something completely separate in an environment where most people didn't even know who he was, because these were just people who were not really interested. So it allowed me to just kind of forge my own identity. So there was that. But it was also something that if I were to apply some of that past thing, I felt that there was an audience for the stuff that I was wanting to do, because, obviously we were dealing with content, and people want to find ways to feel something, and not just to be sold something, but as you're being sold a product or service, to actually feel something. And you would know this as well. And so that was a chance for me to be able to chart a path there, but also to work on something that I felt I had an innate ability in, which is storytelling, essentially. And so that was, I think, a first moment where I said, okay, I don't want to just be Idris Jala's son. I want to do my own thing. And so I set some goals about certain awards I wanted to win in my time in advertising, and I got those things. But then after that, there came a point where I said, this was when that opportunity to join Pemandu and start that comms outfit came about. So that was part two of now thinking, what does it look like to still chart my own path, but now being a little bit closer to the fire, a bit closer to my dad now, in something where, even though it was still a separate entity doing a very different type of business, because you're in that environment, obviously now people are going to start making those comparisons. And so for me in that period, that was harder to do. And I think one of the things that I struggled with over a couple of years was that I ended up finding myself in this place of burnout. And it was very interesting, because when that happened, naturally what I thought was the cause of burnout was just sheer volume of work.
Yeah.
And this was also at the start of the pandemic as well. So I was going through a few things. I was experiencing this. I had just become a dad as well in that period. And then obviously we were in lockdown. So many new things happening. And I remember I wasn't doing so well. And then it was my wife, again, being my warrior, who just said, Leon, I think something's not quite right. You're not yourself. And I think you're probably not going to like hearing this, but I think you need to seek some professional help. And so I was reluctant at first, but I did it. And when I spoke to the therapist, what she said was very interesting. She said, actually, after I've assessed you, your problem and the reason why you're feeling burnt out is not necessarily because of the volume of work, but it's actually stemming from the posture in which you're doing your work. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, what you basically have is something called automatic negative thoughts. I said, okay, that's interesting. What does that mean? She says, you go through life, your work, even if you're doing well, you're doing the things to compensate for this fact that you don't feel like you're very good. What she deduced was that, perhaps because you fear this comparison with your dad, while you might be excelling at stuff, you're excelling, but it's being driven by this idea or this notion or this belief that I'm not good enough, and therefore I must prove myself in everything that I do. And so what we worked on in the end was not to help me to reduce my tasks, but to help me to do the same volume of work, but from a different posture, from a less inward-looking posture of how can I prove other people wrong? How can I prove myself that I am someone other than the son of Idris Jala? To thinking, let's put Leon aside, and let's just focus on how can whatever I'm doing be of service to other people. And this is really where I got the past framework from, because it was me doing this exercise with her that made me realize actually the key sometimes, and it's not all the time, in some cases it's objectively because there's just too much work, but actually for a lot of us, maybe sometimes the deeper problem is the posture in which we're approaching our work. Are we doing the things that we're doing because we genuinely want to make a certain change, whether for the people around us or make a certain change in society? Or are we doing those things to satisfy some kind of deeper insecurity about ourselves? And so that was one of the key moments that helped me to realize, even if people have certain thoughts about me, actually it's okay. Because as long as I'm just focused on and razor clear about the why behind my work, that in the end, the truth will set me free and the results will speak for themselves. And ultimately, it doesn't even matter what other people think, because if I'm purely focused on the actual audience or the actual community or people that I want to impact, and as long as it's making a difference in their lives, then, actually what other people think doesn't really matter very much at all.
Oh, that's a very deep one. Here's the irony, right? A lot of times, especially when we work with people who are very, very effective, and when you ask them to think about the why, they will always tell you this one thing. Why does it matter? The result is the same altogether.
Right.
Right? Like, you're wasting time.
Yeah.
Just do. Don't think.
Yeah.
Right? While both results are the same, somehow it is just different. I would argue that it's more scalable when you have a true intention and you're clear about it. Number two, I think the joy behind it, right? I would suggest, like, people out there, even if you're thinking about trying to be rich or trying to be wealthy, and I always tell people the same thing. I think the hardest part to get right about money is not the numbers, but the intention behind the numbers.
Very good.
Right? But that requires you to do the harder work, which is there's no textbook.
Right.
It is just a lot of quiet time, you yourself, and if let's say it's God or just you yourself,
Yep.
right? You got to figure out, because there's no standard textbook. There's nothing there, right? That's the hardest part that people need to get right. But once you get that right, it becomes extremely, extremely powerful. And I would say that getting professional help sometimes do help quite a bit, right? I've been toying about this idea of going to see a therapist as well, simply because quite many of my friends have seen the benefit of it. And I'm wondering to myself, like, will it help me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, for those of you out there, if you have experience, seeing a therapist and you want to share with us, how did that help you? Please leave it in the comment as well. So, because I know generally, especially guys, we are usually very, why do I need to see a therapist, right?
And I struggle with it because obviously as someone who at that time I wasn't working in ministry, I wasn't working for a church yet, but I was still very much involved. And so there was this whole thing of, well, if I go and see someone for professional counseling, then am I sort of diminishing what God can do to guide me or to steer me? Like, don't I have pastors to be able to do that for me? But the wisdom that I gained from some of our pastors who kind of shepherded me was this idea that, okay, well, a Christian can still go to church, and if they've got an ailment, yeah, they would still probably ask for prayer for that ailment. But I would think that most of them would also still be very happy to go see a doctor.
That's right.
to get whatever medication or treatment that they need. So it works out the same with mental health as well.
That's right.
Obviously the caveat here is maybe make your first point of call, bringing it to God and practicing your spiritual disciplines. But, perfectly fine to go and also see someone professionally to give you that practical help along the way as well. It's not one or the other. It's actually both.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, totally agree. I think a big part of therapy and counseling is about helping you figure out your problem and then giving you some certain quick tool sets to deal with it, right? Yeah. And so the part of it when you come into prayer, or whether if you're a Christian you come into prayer, or either you yourself doing a lot of self-reflection, I think that assists the part and make it faster for the therapist to help you to come to terms
Absolutely.
with those things, right? Because part of it is that they always say this, if you know what's the problem, 50% is done.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the first part. And surprisingly, many people are not willing to face that problem. Yeah. Maybe by the virtue of just, I don't want to know that's my issue, or whatever other reasons, right? But that's a topic for another day. Now, having said that, then here's the question, right? You describe a lot about your growing up, that a lot of the choices that you made were based on, I do not want to be like my dad, right? I don't want to be compared to him.
Yeah.
When life is supposed to be, this is what I want and I pursue it. But instead it's driven by what I don't want to be, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit of mistakes.
Right.
What were some of the mistakes that you have made when you were trying to craft your own identity as you grow up?
Well, I think the biggest one is I feel like I probably missed out on a lot of learning that I could have gotten a lot sooner from my dad if I had maybe taken a more healthy approach of charting my own path, but doing so by also seeking his wisdom and guidance. Dad, I want to do my own thing, but I want your advice. How can I do my other thing? But maybe using some of the wisdom that has helped you in your path. I think that would have been a better stance to take. That probably would have given me a bit more of an advantage, I would say, in some of the other stuff. because for me, it was a full removal. I just don't really want to have anything to do with you. I don't want to sound like you. If I find myself sounding like you, I'd beat myself up over it and they, oh no, I'm starting to sound like my dad. That's not a good thing. Yeah.
Wow. And so how was it like growing up during that period of time? Because it lasted quite long until you're working and all, right? And because as a child, I suppose all of us, when we grow up, there's a certain period of time when we wanted to be like our dad, right? And I guess that's why you play the guitar very well, right? And I do notice that you connect with that over guitar. That became the thing, right?
Yeah.
And then there's this phase where I do not want to be like them. That kind of determines a big part of you as well. Necessary, unnecessary, how to be done. Until today, I think it's still a question for many people and researchers as well. And now today, you are a dad. So how all this come around right now to deal with this whole complication and that underlying feeling of, I want to be like him, but yet I do not want to be like him, you know, that kind of thing. And you're going to look at your kids in the same way, right? I want them to be like me, yet I do not really want them to be like me as well, right? That's what I always tell my wife. I want my kids to be like me, but yet not like me.
Well, you said it, you know, it's exactly that for me. I think the turning point was when I became a dad. Because when I became a dad, I started to realize there are some things I really want to instill in my children. Then I figured, that's probably what my dad thinks as well. And all this while, I've just been running away from him. And so over the period of being a dad, that's where I eventually thought, actually, you know what, as a bit of a personal project, I actually want to make a bit of a change. And I want to figure out a way to not only just draw nearer to him, but to do so in a very intentional and structured way. And then to add a bit of accountability to do it in a public way as well. And that was when we decided to do the Game of Impossible podcast. This was started about a year and a half ago, November 2023. I remember having a conversation with my wife, and I had always been floating this idea of doing a podcast because for me that was just my storytelling cap. I just wanted to tell and hear stories of other people, but I never had a compelling enough reason to do it. And so my wife said, "You know what, Leon, I'm sick of you saying every single year for like the last 4 years that you're going to do this podcast and you never do it."
Your wife very brutal, huh?
She's brutal. But it's like some of the best stuff that's happened in my life is because she was willing to just tell it to me. And so I was like, yeah, you're right. She said, you work well with deadlines, right? And you're like agency work, you handle deadlines very well. I'm going to give you a deadline. She says, now is November 2023. By February 2024, I want you to release your first episode. Whatever this podcast is going to be like, I don't care if it's like the worst thing you ever produced, but you just got to put something out. And so then under pressure, I thought, oh gosh, I really have to figure out something to do. And so I started scratching my head and I started thinking about doing a solo thing. But then I realized, well, if I want to do this, I want to make sure that it's something that I can do on a weekly basis, to have a weekly churn. Then I thought, the thought of getting external guests in on a weekly basis, quite a lot for one person to do. And then I remember it was almost as though there was like an audible voice just telling me, don't look so far. The answer is right under your nose, which was basically my dad. I said, but that's the one person I've been trying to distance myself from for so long. But then I felt challenged, where I felt challenged by the fact that, you know, I think you've been basically stifled because you've not leaned on him. Why not, as a little thought experiment, give it a go and see what happens? And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to have a conversation with him and propose this idea of a podcast, thinking he's sure gonna reject it. But when I shared it with him, he said, okay, let's do it. And so we did our first episode, and that was really the beginning of me actually completely changing my mindset. If in the past I wanted to do everything to distance myself from him, I think now I'm very much in a space of actually how can I make the most out of my learning, and how can I take the best of what I can get from him, because obviously no parent is perfect. There are going to be things about my dad that objectively, you know, I want to do better in. But you know what? There's a huge wealth of stuff that I think I'd be stupid to not glean from in an intentional way. And then I thought, if we apply the PASS thing, I felt, well, to make this even more purposeful, how can I invite other people on that journey as well? To make this a public thing, how do we do that? Let's maybe make it a podcast. Let's put some cameras, film our conversations so that my learning is also benefiting other people along the way.
Fantastic. Yeah, I still remember at one point I bumped into you in the morning
Right.
in the LRT.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and then that was before the Game of Impossible. And you told me, you say, you've been toying about coming on a podcast and you wanted to talk to me.
That's right.
Yeah, I think you were still procrastinating at that point, right?
Yeah, it's in the thick of the procrastination.
Yeah. So how did I know was, you say you want to talk to me, and the next thing is, you did not talk to me for a very, very long time.
I just did
Instead,
it.
you sent me to talk to your wife. Yeah, you were more excited to put me in touch with Signal Flare at that point. Then he told me, I want to do this podcast. And he said, hey, Andrew, talk to him about Signal Flare. So I was like, oh. Then later, suddenly you came out the podcast after by the end of the year, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah,
that's
I
right.
think it was a thick
By
of
the way, I missed
procrastination.
my deadline because she said February 2024. We only released our first episode March 2024. So I told her, sorry, I'm a bit late, but at least I did it.
All right. No, it's amazing how things can change when you start putting your own self aside, or pride in that sense aside, and start to be the full self. So before we end with this part of it and move on to the real world, right? How do you think by setting aside this pride helped you in your later journey, which up to today? And if you did not let go of that pride, how would life have been different then?
I think having this attitude of service has really helped. And I would say it's been crystallized probably in the last few years since I started working for a church. There were very practical reasons why I was forced to take more of a servant's posture in working for a church, because obviously in a church, then for me to make that move from my corporate work to go to a church, then that involved a pay cut to do that. But in taking a pay cut, then it really forces you to think, why am I willing to take a pay cut? And this was right at the thick of me being a new dad. Worst, you would think objectively, the worst time to take a pay cut would be when you're now a father of a kid. Don't you want to make sure that you're earning more money because now you've got more responsibility, more bills to pay? But I remember doing this kind of deep reflection, and at the time when there was an offer to work for the church, there was also another venture that both my wife and I wanted to explore. And so we had all the things in place already to start this new venture. And on paper, it made so much sense. It was a real no-brainer venture. It would have been very, very exciting. Good chance for us to continue to work together as well. But then there was this offer to come and work for the church. And very interestingly, despite the venture making a lot more sense on paper, and this church thing not making sense on paper, and me honestly not being very excited about the church thing, despite that, there was an underlying joy, underlying peace around this church role versus the other thing, which made a lot more sense and which I was personally more excited about, but somehow didn't feel peace with. And so this church thing began this journey of me realizing that actually there's so much value and so much joy that you can find when you begin to take yourself out of the equation and when you really begin to serve people. And in this way, it's a very obvious outworking of service, because we do everything in order to pastor people, not to build ourselves, not even to make the church a bigger church, but to be able to raise leaders. And I would say, what is the main thing that HTBB does as a church? It is obviously to point people to God through services, through different small gatherings. But as we're doing that, to be able to make sure that we're also raising others and raising leaders, so that we're not, as our vicar Abel says, that we're not climbing ladders, but rather that we become ladder carriers for other people. And so I think that began this posture of service for me. How has that impacted me? I think that has helped me to grow as a leader. I would say that in the early stages of my career, when I was put in leadership positions, I was put in leadership positions purely by virtue of quality of work. Does that necessarily mean that you're a great leader? Actually, no. You can be a very good contributor, very good solo contributor, but not necessarily a good leader. Because in order to lead someone is to be able to have a mindset of, how do I make this person better than me? But what I had found myself doing was, I was a great contributor and then I became a leader, but I still led like a contributor. And how that played out was I started to hoard work because I figured if now I'm recognized as a leader, then obviously they want me to do more of this. But then as I was doing that, I realized that my teams were not growing because I was just doing the work. I was just telling them what to do, but not actually explaining how to do it and not really empowering them to have the tools to be able to do that work better than me. And so I think by adopting this service or servant mindset, that has been hugely beneficial in helping me to lead better.
Right. Now that you're sorted out, we talked about like sorting out the internal self. But as we talk about the reality, things don't change on the outside.
Right. Yeah.
You're still Idris Jala, son.
Absolutely.
You're still in a company where you're close to your dad, and many people are still going to say that, hey, that's because he's the son.
Yep.
Right? Let me just put it this way. Even the fact that you choose to be a pastor as well on the side, people are still going to have comments like, he can afford to do that because he's Idris Jala's son.
Right.
Basically, whatever you do, good or bad, also you're Idris Jala's son. Right? Things don't change. Right?
Exactly.
So how do you handle those real pressure now? Like in real life?
Yeah.
How do you turn those pressure into a fuel for success then?
Originally, my default setting is to want to turn that into fuel for success. And I still find myself doing that. Like every time, I'll give you a great example. You know, whenever my dad and I do any sort of speaking engagement, I would say quite honestly, there are quite a few times where we've done an engagement. And then when they start to put out their marketing materials, the communications materials, they would title the talk by Idris Jala.
Yes.
Leon Jala is nowhere in the picture, nowhere in the materials.
I'm not surprised.
So obviously, then there's a feeling of, oh, why did they? This is Game of Impossible. It's my idea, Game of Impossible is my idea. Why are they only talking about you? So obviously there are those frustrations, and so my initial default is always, okay, how can I use that to fuel my desire to do well? Obviously that works, and I have applied that same thinking in the past for other pursuits, and it's served me very well. I think that was why I did well when we started this communications arm under Pemandu, because I felt I had a point to prove, and that really fueled me to be able to work so hard at what we were doing. But then I experienced that burnout thing, which made me realize how sustainable is the effort if the only thing that is driving you is to change the opinions of other people. So while that might be a good starting point, what I've started to do now is to still acknowledge the fact that it's frustrating sometimes if, people completely disregard me as the other part of the equation of this thing. But to say I'm not acknowledging it so that I can rant about it, but rather I'm acknowledging it so that I can bring it to light and not just keep it so that I hold this inner resentment that cannot be dealt with. So for me, what I would do is I say, I'm going to acknowledge it. I'm going to bring it out. I'm going to bring it out to people that I trust. So I will talk about it, process it with my wife. Then for me as a Christian, I would also bring that to God in prayer. But the caveat is I don't bring it out and say, now I'm going to show them. The end outcome of this conversation, whether it's with my wife or whether it's with God, is to say, I'm bringing this to light because I feel this way, and I'm acknowledging that I feel frustrated, I feel whatever about this, but I'm bringing it to you because I don't want to use this purely as my fuel to do better just for the sake of proving people wrong or changing people's opinions, but I want to bring it to you so that that can be now out of the way. And so that I can continue to do what you've called me to do, but without being blinded or hindered by this. Because if I'm purely fueled by that anger or that frustration, then I think that's what will probably lead me eventually to that path of burnout. Because whatever I'm doing, the sacrifice is not made for a greater cause, but the sacrifice is made to essentially prop myself up. And that doesn't become sustainable. And so I think that has been the mindset, really, to still call it out, to bring it to light, because you can't deal with something unless it's in the light. But then once it's in the light, find ways to get that out of the way so that you can move on and focus on the task at hand.
How difficult it is to get that out of the way?
Difficult. a lot of prayer. And it has to be a daily, for me at least, it's a daily discipline. So I'm glad you asked that question, because it's not like you have one conversation with your trusted friends or advisors, one conversation with God and it's gone. I mean, the reality is that this is something that happens every single day. And different people are wired differently. Different people are driven by different things. I would say if I had to take a very honest assessment of myself, then I'm driven a lot by what other people think of me. That's just kind of a default setting
Yep.
of mine. So I have to work very hard at that. So for me, what that looks like is a daily discipline. Actually, it's not even a weekly thing. Every single morning, I have my quiet time. In my quiet time, I ask this one question, which is, God, what is your agenda for me today? And that just helps me to do a bit of a reset. In the day, of course, I'm going to end up probably making a few decisions that are objectively probably more my agenda. But at least if I start the day by asking that question, I'm a little less likely to do that because I'll remember, oh, but I asked God that question this morning, and I sense that maybe what I'm about to do now seems like it's probably serving myself a little bit more than serving Him or serving the people that He's placed around me. And so a daily discipline of asking, what is your agenda? If you're not a Christian, then asking, well, what do you think should be the greater agenda that would serve the people around me?
Yeah.
Best?
I think here's where a lot of people get it wrong about change, right? They often think that when you decide to change, let's say you sort out your purpose or you figured out this is my issue, tomorrow morning you will wake up a new man. A new man meaning that suddenly you are equipped with a lot more kindness, a lot more patience, or it doesn't work like that, man.
Right.
It's just like any form of addiction or cigarettes or anything like that, right? It's a daily exercise to remind yourself that, okay, I'm not going to smoke today, right? Doesn't mean that there are days that you fall back on it. You just got to acknowledge that, okay, today I made a mistake. I succumbed to it, but tomorrow I'm going to start a new day again and fight it again, right? It's going to be a lifelong process. So I guess the point I want to make is if any one of you out there, you're trying to change certain aspect of your life or you're dealing with certain challenges and you acknowledge that that's certain parts of you need to change to deal with it. Do not be dismayed if tomorrow you wake up, things are still the same.
Yeah, and I think the huge encouragement is, a lot of people who have written some really great books, the common thing that they share is that they would say, well, people assume that because I wrote this book on productivity, that I'm the most productive person in the world. Actually, the reality is I wrote this book because I think I'm one of the least productive people. It's just that because I'm so unproductive, I've had to think very hard about how to be productive. And so actually, I wrote this book more as a manual for myself.
That's
And,
right.
Naturally other people like it, but it doesn't mean that I am, just because I'm an authority in something, doesn't mean that it's naturally the one thing that I'm very good at.
That's right. That's what people always say. Mr. Money, you should be very rich and you got a lot of money. The point is, I got no money. That's why I'm trying to figure out how to make more money and be good at money. And that got me into it. In fact, the other day, under one of my YouTube videos, there was a statement by one guy or girl. She just put it there. I kind of figured that Mr. Money actually probably don't have that much of money. I was like, precisely, you're right. If I have that much money, I wouldn't be doing this. Jokes aside, let's move on. As a son of Idris Jala, Leon, a lot of people will tell you that your dad has a lot of wisdom, right? Your dad has a lot of full guy. He can probably publish a book today about how to be successful and it'll be authority in the market, right? Now, this is the best question that I'm going to ask you. What is one thing that he taught you about success that turns out to be wrong for you? It may not be principally wrong, but it just did not work for you.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I got to tread very carefully on this one because as a general principle, I agree with it. The caveat here is that it should have been taught with a bit of preamble to handle with care and to discern carefully, which is we have this motto of big, fast results. And even before he was running Pemandu, that has just always been a household motto. Everything you do big.
Household motto.
Yeah. Everything you do it big. Everything you do it fast. Everything you do, make sure there's hard line results for the thing that you're doing.
Wow, even at home, power.
It's not necessarily something that he would sit us down and say, I want you to do this. But that was just because that was what he always talked about it. So, a culture or a DNA, it's taught, but it's also caught. So in our case, in our household, a lot of it was caught just because those were the ways in which he was talking about the stuff that he was doing. So I think for me personally, I 100% agree with it. But I think that it needs to be handled with some discernment because not everything necessarily falls under the bucket of big, fast results. And I think there are certain things, let's say maybe in the example of being in a church environment, when the main currency actually, I would say, in a church environment is actually relationship with people. If you apply a big, fast results thing to every component of church life, then you're quite likely going to end up ruffling a lot of feathers. You might even start to breed some disunity within the team. And so I've realized that for me, if I were to bring it down to maybe a specific failure, I think there was this was not in church actually. I was still in my corporate job, but it was a failure in leadership, because I felt that everything needed to be big. I felt everything needed to be fast, and so by virtue of that, how do you get things done quickly? You do it yourself. And I spent a lot of time in one of my previous roles doing the work myself. And then I remember being very humbled when I came down to getting our 360 feedback, thinking, oh, I've done a great job, right? Because I got the big, fast results for the company. To find that my 360 feedback was terrible, because everyone just wrote that I was a bad leader. Because they say, well, okay, yeah, we've achieved all of these things, but I've actually not found that Leon has spent any time coaching me. I've also felt discouraged because whatever I did, if I didn't do the right thing, there would be no guidance and no real reasons why it was the wrong thing. But rather, what Leon would do is he would just take over the work and do it himself. And it's very funny because in my mind, I didn't see it as a problem, because I had this false notion of big, fast results. And therefore, by doing this, I thought, maybe that would show the team that, I'm down in the trenches with them, and I'm willing to kind of step in and do the work, not realizing that actually what it was causing was the opposite, and that I was actually degenerating or just actually becoming quite a bad leader. And so that was one area where maybe big, fast results is a good model and a good way to approach things. It's also in line with the question here about what is the one thing I would want to, teach my children. But I think handle it with some discernment, that not everything necessarily has to be a big, fast result, especially if you're dealing with people. Yeah. Listen to people. Don't just try to fix their problems immediately. You've got to be able to allow space for that to happen. That's not a big, fast result kind of situation.
I think a big, fast result has to be something that does take context into account.
Well, yeah. Correct.
For example, even at a corporate level, I think you do not want failure that are big, fast result. You want small, fast result, right?
Yeah.
Small failure happening fast, and you see the results and learning.
Exactly.
Because the big result, you may not recover for it for your next lesson, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
I think there are certain principles and values that we just can't apply it all across, right? Yeah. And yeah, I think here's where the interesting part is, because you grow up in that environment, and being a dad, I can totally understand, right? There's a lot of things that you will say at home that you do not explain the full context.
Sure.
It's just another conversation.
Yep.
Like, I think there are times that when I have a conversation with my wife, probably my kid is picking it up. Like, just to give you a very good example that I thought was recently I experienced. So there are times when I find that my kid gets a little bit pushed around. Whether is it a physical bully or not, I'm not sure, but he gets pushed around a little bit, right? And sometimes it gets a little bit physical, and I'm the kind that I will not go to school and tell the teacher, like, hey, someone's doing something. Because I feel like it's your problem, you settle yourself. That's my way of helping you to build your own confidence. But if it gets bad, I'm going to interfere, right? So I will monitor and pay attention. So the other day I asked him, so if someone were to hit you or too rough with you, why not you just shove the person back, right? Why not you just hit back maybe, right? They told me this. Papa, that's me bullying people then. You say cannot hit back. If you hit people, it's wrong.
Right.
That was like, how do I explain this?
Yep.
So I just left it there. I just told him, then you block. I don't know what to say. Context, right?
Yep, exactly.
So, yeah, I thought it would be quite interesting as you grow up in such an environment where a lot of things that were being taught by your dad, whether consciously, subconsciously, and sometimes the lack of context, and what would it be? Now, to move on to that, I want to ask you this one thing, right? Coming from a family now where you have seen what success could look like, right? definitely there are different scale of success. We talked about billionaire families. There's a different scale of success. But I think for any ordinary family, right, where your dad kind of success is quite an epitome, because coming out from nothing, building everything, coming up to where he is, and living a family legacy at this point, right? And not just within a family, but quite public as well, right?
Yeah.
And you having the privilege of also spending time with different groups of people from different social circles and status as well. How would you define success today?
I think to me, success is the ability to make an impact in people's lives, regardless what that looks like. For some people, if you are in a business, then of course you want to grow your business and you want it to obviously do well. But if you are a $1 billion company, but at the end of the day, actually, most of your people don't feel like they're being developed and don't feel like their lives have been impacted through the work that you're doing, then to me, I personally don't regard that as success. For me, the success is truly measured by impact. Even if for some people that just means that they're only going to impact 5 people. But I'd rather impact 5 people directly, where you actually see lives changed, rather than to just do something and make a lot of money but not be able to directly see a change in people's lives. And I suppose for me, that's why I ventured more into kind of church work, because it allowed me to then have a very visible way of seeing how lives are changed. I was obviously able to do this with my advertising career as well. But what I found with that one is it was always a bit more indirect, because you'd hear stories about how people were touched by these different TV commercials that we would do. But I wouldn't be able to see that change happening in real time. On a Sunday, every service, it makes the work that we do so worthwhile, because you actually see it out in the congregation. You see people, you see people tearing. You see people's lives just completely transformed. It's very, very real, very tangible. For the work that we do in Pemandu as well, it's a little less direct, because maybe I'm not in touch with the actual stories of communities and people who have been impacted. But in that sense, then at least we know that whatever we're doing, whether if it's in the business context, is that we're helping to create jobs. But then in the area of public policy, then we're helping to shape policy that will hopefully, lead to a more equitable society. And so for me, it's always about the impact. And that's why we always use this language of a true north. Because a true north is not just a number, but a true north has to be tied to a greater sense of purpose that is bigger than you. And I think one way to further articulate that, which is a little newer for me, is what our vicar Abel has said as we were trying to define what the true north is for HTBB, which is our church. He worded it as, what is the 100-year legacy? And I thought, 100 years? Initially, I was like, 100 years is a little too lofty. It's a bit too up in the air. Why would you want to think 100 years? Why not 5 years? A bit more tangible. We're probably going to have a bit more urgency about the work that we do. But then I realized that the whole beauty of looking at something through a 100-year timescale is that in 100 years, you're not going to be around. Our children are not going to be around as well. And so what that tells us is that whatever we build has to be able to outlive generations to come. And when you start looking at things through a 100-year timescale, obviously you still have your more immediate goals that you want to work towards, but whatever you're doing in your immediate goals is all in the context of the 100-year legacy. Because when you think of a 100-year legacy, if you know you're not in the equation, if you know your children are not in the equation anymore, then you're less likely to be doing empire building for yourself. And you're more likely to think, how is what we're trying to build here actually going to be not only beneficial for people down the line, but how we going to build systems that will allow other people to also take it on to the next level.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think this is very true regardless of whether are you in a company or for your own life, right? I think there's one wisdom that I learned, I think it was in Bible as well, which is teach me how to number my days, right? And I recall when I was a teenager, there was a game that was played in my church that they asked this very simple question of, if one day you were to pass away and you happen to be in your own funeral, what would people say about you? And that was actually something that really changed me very, very much. In fact, up to today, a lot of the decisions I make comes down to that one question. What will people say about me in my funeral day when I'm no more there? Right? It doesn't matter whether I'm now this period when I'm here, it doesn't matter. It's when I die.
Yep.
Right. And
would
that
it
kind
be
of
for
becomes
you?
that North Star for me, right?
Yeah.
That's why there are a lot of conscious decisions I make today in this business works as well. And if you're thinking that is too we are talking in terms of spiritual term, whatnot. Actually, it's not, because if you think about how China actually became such a strong country today, it started with that. It started in a very, very early day when Xi Jinping became a president. He said this one thing: by 2025, we want everything in the world to be made in China. And he came out with the policy made in China 2025,
Yep.
which that time was like a decades long plan, right? And so over the last year, we started seeing China brands popping out of nowhere. China tech coming out of nowhere.
All over the place.
All over the place. And it was when you begin something with the end in mind, right? And definitely this end is I believe it is a bigger playbook lah, right? But that's just one of the milestones. So yeah, if anyone out there who are thinking about like, let's not talk about 10 years, I think that's where you need to start. Yeah. After you settle that, you settle your 5 years, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. If not, after you hit your 5 years, you do not know where to go. Like, hey, we're done with 5 years. What do we do now? Let's think about it.
Yep.
And the sad thing is this, right? Because sometimes if you do not have that long-term goal, you only set short-term goal. And once you hit that short-term goal, the comfort itself will not allow you to set the next goal because it's just too comfortable. Right? Yeah, which from here I want to explore the final part of this section before we go into the end is there are a lot of people out there today where they are also born in certain privileged family. Different scale of privilege. But let's just talk about those that to a certain extent, they do not really need to suffer. They don't have to worry about food on the table or parents needing to pay a certain bill. Yeah, everything is an option. If I want to study overseas, I can, and everything all. And when you look at families like that, I know they have their own struggle as well. I still recall this one thing that someone once told me. It is not easy because when I hear other people talking about rags to riches story, I know I can never have that story. Yeah. And so there's this part about also how do I engineer certain struggle for myself or for my kids as well, right? And I thought maybe you can shed some light into that, right?
Yeah.
How do you then balance the dynamic between using the privilege at hand to live a better life? Because I totally don't think that it's a smart thing if you have certain privilege and you don't use it. I mean, as someone who comes from nothing, I'm building all the privilege that I can build so that I can move things, right? So it doesn't make sense if we build it and we don't use it, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you're fully in privilege, you won't learn certain things that needs to be learned. And so how do you balance it?
So for me, it has been obviously, first of all, acknowledging that you do have privilege. I think in the past, I found it difficult to acknowledge it because I felt that the only way for someone to truly succeed was to not have privilege. And obviously, looking at my dad's story, my dad grew up in the jungles of Borneo. He had to walk for up to 5 days in the jungle to get to the nearest town, to get to school. Real hardship. And so I would always say to him, well, obviously you had the impetus to succeed because you had nothing. You had no other choice. The only way for you to see the world beyond the jungles of Borneo was to do well, to do exceptionally well in school, to be able to get out. And obviously having that maybe chip on your shoulder, probably the reason why he was able to continue to succeed in everything else that he did. So I said, well, it's harder for Max and I, my brother and I, because we are born into relative privilege. I mean, obviously in the early stages of my childhood, my dad wasn't that successful yet, but obviously we had general creature comforts available to us. And so I figured that the only way was to not even try to do well, because I thought, well, the same thing, whatever I do, people are just going to say, well, it's just because you have privilege. But to your question, I think some practical ways, and I'm not an expert. I'm also still trying to figure out what's the best way to kind of maybe engineer a little bit of pressure for myself. But a simple thing is, acknowledging that of course we have certain privilege, but what I try to do is I try to engineer my finances such that I almost create this illusion of scarcity. And so things like, obviously there are certain things that I could be able to afford in cash, but I don't. Because for me, if I were to pay up, let's say, a car in cash, then obviously it would be easier to do that. I don't have to think about it anymore. It's just less on my mind. But I think for me, that is the problem. I kind of feel like I need to have a little bit of pressure. So I engineer things. I take up loans still because I want to have the monthly discipline of still thinking, crap, I've still got to pay off my car. I've still got to pay off our home. I've still got to do all of this. And so then that creates a little bit of this mindset of scarcity where a bigger sort of lump sum of cash is stored away, which I don't touch. And I just purely operate from my current account. And so I see money coming out of it, which means that at the end of the month, I don't actually have very much in my current account. And so for me, that is just one of the kind of more practical ways that my wife and I try to engineer a bit of what we call the oh crap moments in life. Because I think the reality is there are some people who are maybe going to be very self-driven, and even if they had massive amounts of wealth, will probably just have the natural tenacity to be able to really go at the things that they're doing. But I've also come to realize that for me, my biggest danger zone actually is the comfort zone. Like if I'm too comfortable, then that's exactly where I will probably drop off the bandwagon. And so that is one of the ways that we do that. A bit of engineered scarcity in our lives financially.
I think there's one part as well where you chose to move away from doing business together with your dad in the early days and going into advertising, which in the world of advertising, they don't give a two damns about who your dad is. And most of them probably even don't know who your dad is. And from what I've heard as well, you were extremely hardworking there. Right? Yeah.
I think in advertising, you got no choice.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I was naturally hardworking. It's just that you had no choice. You
That's
had
right.
to stay back till
nobody,
6 a.m.
Nobody cares who you are, right? Like, I don't care. You're Dato Sangha, Tan Sri Sangha, brother. Just submit the thing, man. Yeah. So, how did that part of a struggle shaped you then?
Yeah, good question. I think that taught me the importance of details. So I remember one of the things that I was so frustrated by when I was in advertising is that sometimes, I'd be in the office until like 6 a.m. And when I look at the output, it's not like I'd put together some massive volume of work, but I'd been in there because I was stuck on a simple headline. Simple headline that my creative director kept saying was not good enough. And so it forced me to really appreciate the value of scrutinizing the small things and to appreciate craft. There's a time in the season for everything. Obviously, right now in this current season, I shouldn't be spending so much time analyzing craft. But at that particular point, I needed that discipline to be able to write 200 headlines before I get to the one that hit the mark. And I think it's such a good discipline to have, especially now with AI being able to do so much of the work. If you've spent enough hours really working in your craft without any of the shortcuts, it makes you a better driver of things like AI.
Yeah.
Now. It's not to say that, because I cut my teeth in advertising, now I'm totally against using AI to do content. No, absolutely not. I use AI so much for our podcast, even for some of the stuff that we do at church. But I think having spent a lot of time in the thick of really honing the human craft of it, that just means that I've got a more discerning eye now to be able to use AI in a way that it's not just sort of touch and go, but in a way that I can actually use it to make even my own thoughts better, because there's that correct cycle. Right? You put in an original thought, it sort of refines it, but then you also have the mind to say, well, I think this particular thing's not quite right. Let me tweak it further. And then you get something truly remarkable.
That's right. Yeah. I think that at the age of AI today, a big part of it is you need to have the right thinking process. If you have the good thought process, you have good mental models surrounding the skill set you have.
Exactly.
AI becomes a very good co-pilot.
Correct.
But if you are just looking at AI for an answer, you're going to be replaceable quite easily.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I do realize that as well.
Absolutely.
And having said that, I think I want to ask this one thing. Was there anyone who actually told you along the way, right? Why are you even doing this kind of job for a few years? You could have just gone to Pemandu.
Right.
You could have promoted up quite easily.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll be having a way better pay.
Yeah. All the time.
In fact, from what I remember, you told me you had to beg for the job in Leo Burnett.
yeah,
Yeah, you actually beg for the job and say,
Right.
I work for free first.
Yes.
That kind of thing, you know?
Exactly.
So, can you tell me more about that? Why would you even go through that and what's the value in it?
Yeah. Well, okay, the honest answer is that I think the starting point for it was just because I wanted so much to be doing something different to my dad. And that's why I was so desperate to get that job at Leo Burnett. I was just desperate to get any job in advertising. So I didn't even start with Leo Burnett. I started with some small local agency because I thought, okay, maybe that's my best shot. They didn't even reply to my emails. And so then again, that whole okay lah, let me show you. And so then I said, okay, if this small local agency won't even entertain my email, I'm gonna apply to Leo Burnett. But I'm gonna apply as an intern because such was my desperation. So I said, let me just intern for you. Pay me whatever is the bare minimum like intern salary, and let's do 3 months. You know, if I can prove myself, then can I get a job? And you know, my creative director, my ex-boss said, "Okay, well, great, let's do it." So we did it, and then it worked out well. Why did I stay in there? I think there was something for me on a selfish level, which was helping me to deal with some of those insecurities because I was able to do quite well in advertising. I won awards when I was there, so it made me feel good that I was charting my own path. It made me feel good that I was building my own identity as Leon Jala and not just the son of Idris Jala. But of course, along the way, people eventually started to catch wind of who my dad was. They started to become a bit more aware. And so then I would have people ask me exactly that. Why are you here then? But I think by the time I got to that place, what maybe started as me doing the work maybe from an unhealthy place of just trying to address insecurity. By the time we got there, actually, the honest answer was that I truly came to a point where I really loved not just the work that I was doing, but I really loved the people that I was working with in that environment. And naturally, you build some of the best relationships in an environment like that, where you're stuck in the office till 6 a.m. together. You know, at that time, everyone's tired, you know, and you start saying stupid things together. You have some of the best conversations in those times. And so by that point, my answer was always, well, I enjoy the work. It gives me a sense of purpose. And most importantly, I enjoy the people that I work with. And it was in Leo Burnett that I met my wife, Andrea. We worked on the same team together, you know, and so hugely life-giving for me, actually. And I think that's why I always say at the end of the day, culture is so important in any workplace, because if you've got the right culture and if you focus on how to ensure that you're facilitating good culture, good interactions and relationships among the people that you're working with, then those are the things that will help people to be able to go the extra mile, even if they don't need the money. Like in my case, objectively, I didn't need the salary. You know, I could have just, like you said, I could have gone to Pemandu and I could have been promoted fairly quickly as well in that environment. But I didn't do that, at least for that time, because I truly enjoyed the work that I was doing because of the people that I was working with.
Yeah. Now, having said that, now that you reflect back and look at all this, I bet you also have certain friends who maybe have never gone out and work, but chose to stay back in a family business, right? From the very, very beginning itself. What do you see the difference between those who does that and yourself? Now, before you even point out anything, I just want to say that it definitely makes you more relatable, because you know what is it like to work. Yeah, you know what is it like to pay a loan. You know, it's okay, fair. If you don't pay, you won't die, right? Yeah, you still have the backup, right? But at least you're a tad bit nearer and you can understand the lives of people, right? And you're not living in a bubble of your own. That's how it feels like for me as someone who is a friend, right? So, yeah, but for yourself, when you look at it, and you start comparing, I bet you will see certain differences, right? So what would those most stark difference be?
I mean, this is a huge generalization because different friends of mine maybe operate slightly differently in this space. But I would say, as a general thing, and I think it's a positive thing actually, it's maybe something that I want to learn a little bit more from, is maybe for other people who have been born into privilege, some of the positives of that is not feeling overly apologetic about the things that they want to do. I think for me, a lot of the barrier for myself is always there's this apologetic stance. Even if I want to do something very well, I'm doing something well because I feel like I don't deserve to be in that space, and therefore I need to work a certain way to prove that I am worthy. So that's actually, if you ask me, that is an apologetic stance. You're saying, I'm sorry for being here. By the way, I've done my dues to prove that I'm worthy of being here. And so can we move on now? That, I feel that's an apologetic stance. Some of my maybe other people that I've interacted with have taken actually in a way a positive stance. And it's not arrogance, but it's simply actually being able to acknowledge how they can use maybe that privilege a little early on to say, you know what, I accept that I have privilege. I don't want to run away from it, but actually I want to double down on this privilege to see how I can use this to now build stuff that will help other people. And so for a lot of people, I've noticed that they've been able to get there sooner than me because they didn't worry so much about trying to address all of these little insecurities, that they've just thought, yeah, I've got privilege, so what? I want to make it work, but I'm going to make sure that it's not just working to build my own empire, but it's going to serve other people as well.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, for me, actually a learning and something that I want to maybe be a bit better at, to not think about me, to listen to my wife and say the world is not about you, and to just focus a little bit more on, if I've got certain opportunities, certain things available to me, how can I maximize those things to help others?
Yeah. And I thought that was a very good one because at the end of the day, what the reason and what the lesson I want to bring out in this whole interview is, I think very often many people have a misconception about the rich or the people who are more privileged, right? Because I come from that background where I'm not from a privileged background. So when I was younger, I always look at the more privileged family and say, hey, they can do that because they're privileged. And you tend to see them as a different class of people with a different kind of world. Whether it is or it is not, yes, I do acknowledge there are some who are like that. But there's also a lot who are not like that, right? And a big part of it, while I'm pointing my hands and say, hey, these guys are rich, that's why they're like that. And just like the classic saying, three of your fingers are actually pointing by yourself. Actually, the truth is you are seeing yourself as different. Not so much that they are different, but you are seeing yourself as different. And that becomes an excuse to reason out why you didn't achieve certain things. Now, I'm not talking about hardcore poor who...
Sure.
There are certain people who are limited by circumstances, right? For example, you're born in a family with no access to even a laptop, right? That's a whole different story. I'm talking about more closer kind, right? Like say a family earning 5,000 ringgit versus, I'm talking a whole family with 3 kids, right? Versus a family who's like 15,000 ringgit or 50,000 ringgit, right? Because still realistically, you have a laptop at home kind and you still have food. And over the years, I've spoken to many people like yourself and a different group of people. There are some of them who actually went and take over their family business. It's a whole different level of struggle because nobody respects you because their idea is, bloody hell, I've been working with your dad for the past 20 years, building up this company, and now one young chiku come in and you expect to take over me?
Yeah.
And they face a different kind of resistance altogether that we will never face if I go to a company that no one knows me.
Right.
In fact, I may argue that I have a higher chance of succeed than he is because everyone is trying to prove that your son is not good enough, therefore you should pass the company to me, not your son.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so everyone have a different kind of circumstances. And that's something that I actually want our audience to know. In fact, the best way to actually look at this whole situation is not to think about whether are they more privileged or not, but to ask yourself this question, what can we learn from that? And by taking yourself out of the equation, yeah, you are able to do that. So the truth is pride works both ways. Pride doesn't just happen for those who are well-to-do in their family and say, hey, my father is who, or I'm from this family. But pride sometimes is also highly potent among people who are not rich, where you take that as some sense of accolade that, yeah, I was poor.
Right.
Because if I made it, I can tell people rags to riches, right? But if I don't make it, circumstances made me so. Yeah. But for someone like yourself, if you're not doing well, you can't say circumstances make me so.
No excuse.
You get what I mean? Suddenly it's like, oh, now I think about it, actually it's better to be poor, right? Not to say that we should be poor, but I mean, it's very important that we look at the different side of things. So to end this whole thing, the last question that I'll ask you is this. If one day there will be a Wikipedia page written about you, what would it be?
Wow, no one's ever asked me that before. Wikipedia page written about me.
Let's start with the first question. How much of Idris Jala son should be there first? And then the remaining.
Okay, how much should not like what
much,
I think will be there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like in your opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You know what? In the past I would have probably said very little of it. But I've also just come to realize that actually it's okay to accept that is part of my identity. Because if I were to discredit that entirely, it would be to discredit, how much of a difference not just my dad, but my mom and my family have made in my life. And it goes beyond even my immediate family, because that will also then discredit the overall heritage, even beyond my father, the story of my grandfather, my great-grandfather, all real pioneers. And so, you know what, to be honest, I would actually probably like for the starting few lines of my Wikipedia page to acknowledge the heritage there and to show that. But then to go into, okay, when it starts talking about me, what would that look like? I've started to think about this a little bit, because I remember initially thinking maybe I would like for my accolades to be in there. But then I realized there was, there's that famous adage that people say, when people remember how you made them feel, not what you did. And so I then questioned what would be the feeling. And I think the dominant feeling that I would like people to have when interacting with me, I think it's just a feeling of being encouraged, to be encouraged and to be heard. Maybe this is a bit more of a tombstone thing lah, but I think I would like to be known as, I think, someone who was able to encourage others, to know that they can do a lot more than they imagine that they can do. And so by natural virtue of that, my Wikipedia page would probably have a lot of the stuff that I have maybe done that contributes in that area. So things that I do to raise other leaders, I would like for that to be somewhat central, and hopefully in my lifetime I'd be able to raise some very influential people, and so I'd like them to be highlighted. I'd like there to be something about so and so was coached by Leon. Leon went on to raise this person who went on to become this prime minister or whatever, or this CEO of this company. I'd like there to be a narrative of both the people that have come before me to set the path, but then the fruit of that, which is then the people that I have helped to be able to shape.
Oh, so to be instrumental in the change of someone's life.
Correct.
Right.
So it'll probably be me as a little sandwich in the middle, but more weightage on the people that have shaped me, and then the people that I have helped to shape as a result of that.
Kind of like, now thinking about it, it's a little bit like your grandfather, right? Yeah. Like, people may not think of much of a teacher, right, in Middle Borneo, but because of him, your dad came about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's because of him. I think I probably get this more from my granddad than even from my own dad. My grandfather was someone who wore many hats. So he was a teacher, he was a preacher, he was also a muscle man, and he was a village chief as well.
Right.
So
he was a muscle man. Is that why you have been working out so much?
I think subconsciously there's almost this thing of like my late grandfather was known as one of the strongest men in Barrio.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of, some of it, I don't know whether it's like a little bit fabricated, but there's a lot of folklore around him being able to hold his breath for 2 minutes underwater, not being able to lose to anyone in arm wrestling. His forearms were like the size of my calves. So he was a strong dude. So someone who wore multiple hats, and I see a lot of that a little bit in the way that I approach things. Some might say maybe a jack of all trades, master of none, but I take great joy in kind of doing a lot of different things, and those are things that I get from my grandfather. And I think in terms of our faith, a lot of that, the foundations of that, was laid by my great grandfather, who practiced praying unceasingly without stopping, and I think those are the things that have been able to shape both me, but also my father, and the stuff that we do.
Fantastic. Now, just before we go, since we talk about being instrumental and also encouraging people, I think that there are a lot of people who are watching this today as well. Some of them may be facing with identity struggles, right? As who they are, finding the meaning of life or the purpose of their life, or living in the shadow of someone, right? What is one simple advice that you can give them before we end this episode?
Yeah. So there's two ways to look at this. And it's just this line of maybe sometimes thinking less about who you are, but whose you are. So it's a bit of a Christian cliche. In a Christian context, that just means that we acknowledge that our identity is anchored in God. But then I think even if you are non-religious, then you still ultimately are not just a person that is self-serving. You are a person that is part of either a family or you're part of a wider community. So you can still apply that to say, whose am I? Who am I to my mother and father that I can be of worth? Who am I to my immediate community that I can be of worth to? And I think if we ask that question, then we're essentially getting ourselves to do the past thing again, because you're taking yourself out of the equation and you're just thinking about what's the impact that I can make in the context of what I feel I've been placed to do for the people around me, whether it's for my family, whether it's for my colleagues, whether it's for my friends. So less of who am I and more whose am I.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much, Leon, for being with me in this podcast. Yeah, hope you enjoy. And for those of you who love it, please hit the like button and subscribe. And go and check out Game of Impossible. Definitely one of the best leadership podcasts out there, with a lot of really, really practical tips on how to live your life right, and also at the same time leading an organization. So thank you very much.